Yeah, we're now live, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Climate Change, Environment and Growth EAP. We'll kick off with apologies for absence. So are there any apologies for absence?
No, I haven't received any apologies.
Okay, perfect. Next item is members' declarations of interest. So as per usual, has anybody got anything to declare? No, look fine on that front. Next one is the minutes from the meeting held on the 23rd of February. Hope we've all had a chance to read through those. Any comments, shout now. No, that's good. We're very efficient, aren't we?
Sorry, this is not, I'm certainly not questioning the accuracy at all. Update on carbon management. Is there maybe an update on the update?
We gave a bit of an update last week. So as in, not last week, last month, sorry. So you're looking for a further update on top of that update. Fine, so we can look to giving that. I don't think there's anything substantive just at the moment, but obviously lots of work is going on in the background on all of this. But we're be happy, I'm sure, to come back on that in due course. Okay, so if we're all happy with the minutes, we'll move on to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is garden waste. And I'm just looking, that's down as Graham Kane taking that, unless I'm wrong.
Chair, sorry if I may interject. It's actually Beth who's joined us, who's going to take us through the slide deck. So apologies there. Yeah, it'll be Beth that will take us through the slide deck.
Okay. No, that's perfect. Beth, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Graham is on his way, by the way. So. Okay. Right, thank you very much. This is just to update members on the current garden waste service and the consultation that's been undertaken at the minute. So just in terms of some background, obviously at the minute, residents can dispose of their garden waste through household waste recycling centres and curbside collection from their house. They might also actually manage their own garden waste through home composting. At the minute, we've got an issue where we have different models of curbside collection that basically have inherited from what were the former district and borough councils. So you had an all year round collection in Corby, East Northampton, Kettering, and a March to November collection in Wellingborough. And in Corby, Kettering and Wellingborough, there was no extra charge for that, whereas in East Northampton, there was a £55 annual subscription charge. So just to give you a bit of background in terms of what sort of tonnage we collect, in 2021, you'll see the figures for Kettering and Corby together because it was a shared service and that's how they were reported. But it just shows the different figures across the areas, but taking into account household numbers in each area, you'll see they're quite proportional. And the actual recycling rate was fairly similar across all the regions. And even in East Northampton, where they charge, they still had a 20% recycling rate for their garden waste. So just to put a bit of background around our legal requirements, under the Environmental Protection Act, we classed as a waste collection authority and we have to collect certain types of waste. But under that, there are some controlled waste regulations that enable us to make reasonable charges for certain types of waste, and that includes garden waste. So we can make a charge for collection. The Environment Act has recently come into legislation, and that now specifies certain recyclable household waste streams that must be collected separately for recycling or composting, and garden waste is actually a specified waste stream within that act. So in terms of the consultation that's currently being undertaken, we're trying to gather information to inform how we develop the future of the service. And to do that, we need to understand how people are currently disposing of their garden waste, which are the different methods they're using, which months residents mainly use the service, whether respondents feel we should have the same service in place for everyone across Northamptonshire. So whether that's a non-chargeable service, a chargeable, certain months of the year, we're trying to gauge how their opinion on that. Whether those that use the service should pay for it, because not everybody uses a service. If you live in a flat or have a very small garden, you don't tend to use this service. And if we did introduce a subscription, what sort of level would they likely pay? How would they like to pay? What type of payment methods they would use, and how would they dispose of their garden waste if they didn't subscribe to a service? So the consultation has literally just launched on Monday. It's open for 5 weeks and closes on the 17th of April at midnight. And then the proposal is that obviously following all the submissions, they will be analysed, and then we'll draft the relevant reports, business case, executive report, to go to executive in July. So there are a number of ways that people can take part, and we are keen that this is promoted and we get people's responses to this consultation. So they can do it via an online questionnaire. They can also access that questionnaire free of charge at any Northamptonshire Council library if they don't have access at home. There is an email that they can send comments into, and they can also send them by post. And if people want another format, such as a paper format, we can actually provide that. That's not a problem. So, as I said, the consultation will be reported to executive in July for a way forward. Whatever new service comes into being, with or without a subscription charge, the date for implementation will be decided by executive. That may be autumn 2022, but that depends on us having all the necessary resources available. Just, I thought it was just helpful to sort of summarise some of the potential impacts there might be for different options. So if it was a subscription service, there is a potential for more fly tipping. However, what I'd say is that the number of fly tippings for garden waste are really low compared to other types of fly tip waste, and that includes in East Northants, where they currently have a subscription charge. I think we had about 50 incidents of fly tip garden waste, whereas we had over, thousands of numbers of fly tipped. There may be an issue where some residents choose to burn their garden waste. We do discourage this because it can contribute to nuisance and poor air quality. There may be issues that those with less disposable income may struggle to pay for the service. That's particularly relevant at the moment with the increase in cost of living. And there may be a potential increase for users at household waste recycling centres, which would increase traffic on the road and users at the site. But there are some positives as well. Those that use the service actually contribute to the cost, whilst those who don't use the service don't pay for it. There is a potential for reduced fuel usage. Basically, our vehicles will only travel to where they are required. Our vehicles do probably 5 to 8 miles per gallon, so there's a considerable benefit to that. We'll require fewer vehicles overall. It promotes home composting. So we're promoting dealing with waste at source and waste minimisation. So it doesn't come into the council to deal with. And there's a general trend that the quality of material collected improves. This is because those that actually pay towards a service use it in the right way. They don't try and hide other waste within the bin because they're actually paying for this service. In terms of if there was no additional charge, the potential impacts are, obviously there's going to be a financial cost of introducing a universal service into East Northants area. That'll be the cost of bins, vehicles, staff, the processing costs for the material, because it does cost us to actually process this material. There's a potential for increased fuel usage with the additional vehicles and collections. And obviously those who don't use the service will contribute to it through their council tax. In terms of a positive impact, then there is a potential increase in composting recycling rates, and those with less disposable income can access the service. That was a very, very quick run through of sort of the consultation and what we're trying to achieve from this. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for running through that with us. And just quickly to say, we've also got Councillor Lorman with us, who will be listening intently, I'm sure. Clearly, it's an important part of coming together as one authority to look at where there are differences across the area. So for anybody watching this on YouTube, if you're a resident, please do get involved with the consultation as well. So we've got various hands up. Councillor Lee, yours is up first.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, this is, by the way, a really informative, well-written report. Thank you for that, Beth, if you wrote it, and for putting it to us. My question is, how much weight will be given to the consultation? Can you tell us, for example, if 70% of the responses are against the subscription charge, will then the decision be against the decision against the charge? So I just wonder what weight will be given to the consultation. Thank you.
Shall I answer that, Beth? Thank you. Through you, Chair. So I think that the important thing to, I suppose, to highlight is this isn't a vote, if you like. It is consultation. And forgive me if all members know that. I thought I'd just put that out, because sometimes people think, well, if there's 90% against it, then surely nothing will happen. I think what we want to do is to really understand from the questions that we've posed is where if you like the feelings lie with regards to residents across Northamptonshire, balanced against the financial cost of the service. So clearly, if there's an overriding view from the consultation that people are vehemently against paying any form of subscription, then clearly what the council will need to understand is, okay, so if we do take that route and don't charge, then we need to harmonise, which is because we've got East Northants, as Beth was describing, charging, and we've also got collections in Wellingborough for 3 parts of the year, but not the full year. So we would need to consider the harmonisation of that and the costs of that, and weigh that up against our budgets that we've got more broadly within the council. So I think it's less about waiting; it's about understanding the outcomes of that consultation, and clearly we don't want to preempt that. But once we do, we will then need to look at that in the round set against the budget and the future budget challenges that the council will have. But clearly, this will be a decision that will be led by the executive and led by the executive lead member. So clearly, you know, any final decision will rest quite rightly with the executive. So I wouldn't say there's going to be a waiting, but clearly, as officers and as I'm sure as the executive, they will be very cognizant of the feedback, and depending on which way that goes. Obviously, charging for something in the current climate is probably going to be difficult for a number of people, and I think as a council we understand that. But similarly, we also have our challenges that we need to work through and also consider as part of our wider service delivery across not just place and economy, but also the council. Councillor Lorman, I wasn't sure whether you wanted to add anything to that at all, but that was quite a long-winded answer. Apologies, Councillor Lee, to your fairly simple question.
No, I think you covered it more than adequately, as usual, George. Thank you. That's fine. It covers it. But I mean, I suppose obviously to say that yes, the executive will look at them in great detail and assess them and see where it stands in the broader scope of things, as you've said.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor O'Hara, you're next. Councillor O'Hara, perhaps.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. I think
sorry. I've
Oh,
got
you
two
got it.
questions. Emailed some questions because I wasn't sure what my signal would be like, so apologies. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Question, George. Thank you for that answer. My question is for East Northants, because obviously there's already a charge in place there. Can you tell me whether can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you tell me for East Northants what kind of take-up is in terms of how much we actually collect in East Northants in terms of people who pay? And if we were to introduce a charge, I know Wellingborough doesn't have the collection throughout the year and don't know the reason for that, whether you found that the tonnage was lesser in the winter months or not, I don't know, but that's when most people clear out gardens.
Yeah.
So I know you don't cut grass, but you do clear out gardens during that period. But my concern is that we will get a greater influx of garden waste within the black bins, which then costs us in terms of landfill charges. And that's a massive charge in the current climate. I think in Burton Latimer especially, and when we've seen an increase on the precept by 22%, to add a further amount, whether it be 65, 75, whatever the amount ends up being. I know that's the tip. I'm thinking of older residents who perhaps don't run cars anymore, or people who've had to get rid of their cars for whatever reason. You know, they won't have that ability to take
Councillor O'Hara, we're struggling to hear you now. It's kind of tailed off, unfortunately.
I think we've got the gist of the two questions, Chair, and I could see Beth and Graham fantastically looking at various screens. Oh,
where does it end? And I know that in the presentation, which is this presentation, you try to have.
Oh, I think we've just lost Councillor O'Hara.
Okay, well,
I think we got the gist of the questions, Chair. So if I may, I'll hand over to Beth and/or Graham. I think Beth's come off mute, so it looks like she's got the details at her fingertips.
perfect. And then Councillor O'Hara can look back on the live stream to catch up.
Thanks, George. Yeah, the East Northants take-up, there's currently about 12,000 subscribers in the area. In terms of tonnage during the winter months, yes, it does considerably drop, particularly sort of December, January, February. It's very, very little compared to summer months, and particularly sort of springtime when we tend to get the highest amount as people sort of do their work, as the grass starts growing and trimming back bushes and stuff like that. What I would say in terms of green waste going in the black bin, it is prohibited under the council's waste policies anyway. However, obviously residents only have a certain capacity for their black bin, 180 litres. So that doesn't actually give a lot of extra capacity that some residents might be able to use. So we have tried to make sure that they have enough capacity for their residual waste. And we will get some green waste, probably potentially hidden in those black bins, but the potential for it to be in a large amount is actually limited by the size of the bins.
Okay, thank you, Beth, for those answers.
Thank you,
Dale.
I didn't know if Councillor Lorman wanted to come in on a point there.
I just wanted to say that we shouldn't also forget that in East Northants that Biffa operate a similar operation, and I'm not sure their figures because it's obviously commercial, but I think it's a similar number to we collect. So and they charge a considerable amount more. They're in the £80 to £90 region. And to answer the question about Wellingborough from Councillor O'Hara, it was principally, in fact, if mainly done on financial grounds, that it saves the money in their contract with Norse not to collect in those months. So that was the reason.
Thank you, Councillor Lorman. Apologies for missing you just then. Councillor Dell.
Thank you, Chair. I've filled in the consultation myself, and I did wonder if it was ever considered to have, if it was to be a free service, to have an opt-in for that, because some people don't use, obviously some people don't use the bins, and this was a further question actually. Those people with flats or no gardens, are they actually allocated garden waste bins anyway, or do they not have them? And if it was to be brought in as a free service, because I noticed in I think it was in this, that the waste collection vehicles visit all streets if it was a free service. So is there not an option to make that opt-in for people that so the waste vehicles don't have to go to every street if they don't need to? Or is that just add extra levels of bureaucracy, if you like? Is that something that's been considered?
Who wants to come in there?
Beth's coming in.
I'm happy to take that, Councillor Pentland. In terms of a free service, basically because so many bins are out actually on the street, then yes, we do travel the whole area. And to be honest, to manage it as an opt-in service, that's a huge amount of data that we have to process, try and get to our crews, when actually they're probably going to be going down most of those streets, certainly over the peak periods. In the winter, the crews will use their common sense. They will look down cul-de-sacs before they reverse down, just to see if they can see if there's bins out and things like that. So because it saves them time, plus it saves them having to do reversing manoeuvres and things like that. So they use an element of common sense around those collections over the winter months anyway. In terms of flat provision, no, we don't normally give them green waste bins, although there are some, there are some occasions where they might have a small communal garden that they want to maintain, and in which case, yes, they can have the service. They're entitled to it just like anybody else. So yes, we don't routinely roll garden waste out to particularly new flats, but if somebody contacted us because they wanted to share a bin between a few residents because they've got a small communal area, then yes, that's not a problem.
That's great. Thank you, Beth. I've got a couple more questions. I noticed it mentioned about the Environment Act. Does that then make it a legal thing now that we have to collect from the Environment Act? I'm seeing nods, so I think that's an easy one.
Sorry, Beth, I didn't want to come in because I know you know the answer as well. Yes, the Environment Act requires authorities to collect garden waste as a separate material. So that puts a legal responsibility on us to collect it separately, as they have done for a number of different waste streams. So we are required to collect it.
That's great, thank you. And then finally, I noticed, I did pick up that the current waste collection vehicles do 5 to 8 miles per gallon. I know that I've mentioned this before about the electric waste collection vehicles. I know there's a large capital cost. I think it's something like 300,000 per vehicle. Has there been consideration to, because obviously fuel prices appear to keep going up, has there been any consideration to looking at changing out the vehicles?
Yes, we have viewed some electric vehicles. I think the issue with Northampton's is the how large the area is and how much travelling we do to get to some areas. I mean, if you take East Northants from their depot to, the top of their area is a huge distance, and it's about the infrastructure to support that. Having looked at some councils where they've done that, they've had to put things like substations into their depots to actually put the infrastructure in. So there's a huge capital cost. It's something we keep reviewing, especially when we buy new vehicles, and look at the options around that. It's not something that at the minute's feasible, but that doesn't mean to say that come in the future that it would be feasible. We do operate out of 4 different depots at the minute as well. So that's another consideration if you have to put infrastructure in, about the costs around that. So it's something we keep under constant review and look at the options. And as the technology gets better and the infrastructure gets better, I think it's something that probably will become more of an option to the council. But yeah, we do keep it under review and look at what other people are doing and how they've looked at these issues and whether it's something that we could possibly do in the future.
Councillor Lorman, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I did. Just to say that I fully support the change when it's feasible and when it's cost effective. I mean, the substations we would need individually cost probably more than the vehicles, so there's a hell of an investment needed. And you shouldn't forget that it's not just the trips around the roads to pick up the stuff. They also have to go to wherever their drop site is, which can be some considerable distance and adds quite a bit to the mileage. So I've been and looked at some various vehicles, and I've said it before, but I think that the likely future for these vehicles, which are 24 tonne and cost laden, could be hydrogen rather than electric, and that's a little further off and maybe better. So yes, we're looking at it. Yes, I'm supportive, but it will have to be at the right time when we come to replace the vehicles anyway.
Thank you very much. Just one point, sorry. One last thing. I'm just wondering, do you have any figures on how many people have filled in the survey at the moment? I know it's only been out a day, but from the comments on the Facebook Northants Telegraph article, there's been like 400 comments so far. So hopefully there's over 400 responses.
No, we haven't got any information yet. I do see there's the email inbox, and there's about 45 comments in there so far. So just for your interest, but no, we're going to review how the response is going after sort of the first week or so, just to see what the response has been and look at whether we need to promote it again.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Chair, if I may just come in on, that's absolutely right. We haven't looked at the figures yet, but we will be taking a keen interest in that as it progresses, because we're keen to get as many responses as we possibly can. And I would just say, again, as Beth said, please do promote this amongst your residents and constituents and networks and communities, because we really do want to hear from people. And it's brilliant that people are talking about it on Facebook, and I'm sure they're talking about it around their kitchen tables and everywhere else that they talk about these sorts of things. I know from experience, waste and recycling comes up as a conversation in many social environments where you wouldn't expect it. So I know that it's close to people's hearts. So please do talk about it. But most importantly, please encourage people to fill in the consultation form, because as Beth says, there is an email address there, but we can't process emails in the same way that we can process the consultation responses. So please encourage people to fill out the survey, because that's the most useful thing they can do, so we can capture their views. So thank you for helping with that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Graham. And Councillor Bone and I were pleased to start promoting it at one of the council meetings we attended in our ward on Monday. So I'm sure other councillors will do likewise. Councillor Allibone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, Councillor Lorman's already alluded to the financial aspects of why Wellingborough doesn't collect over the winter period. I think we did ask, because of resident input, we did ask about extra costs and what it would be to continue it. It was several £100,000 a month. It's a staggering figure. And of course, all these budgets have to be put in place before the weather patterns. And as we know, every year is different. Weather patterns vary. You can get warm autumns and everything keeps growing. You can get cold springs where, in actual fact, you can start collecting later than April. But it did run into several £100,000 to extend it.
Thank you for that, for those comments. So unless there's anything else anybody wants to chip in with, officers or members, before we move on. Can't see anything at the moment.
Sorry, Chair. I think all I would say is, obviously this as Beth said, this runs through into April with an exec paper anticipated for July, but I would imagine that we would want to bring something back to the EAP, at least sharing the results of the consultation. We may not be in a position necessarily to share the full details of the paper, but certainly it would probably be sensible to share the results of the paper and next steps, which will obviously be a fairly, as Beth was alluding to in the slide deck, a fairly detailed analysis of that. Conversations will need to take place, and then the report written. But I think it would be helpful, that this particular executive advisory panel are involved at the beginning and at the end, if you like, so that they have a view on the outcomes of that consultation. And again, that can be fed into the final report that goes to executive.
Yeah, no, I agree with you absolutely on that. So we will wait and see how many responses we get in and see how we progress on that. Perfect. Thank you for officers for your presentation on that and input on the answers to questions. Much appreciated. George, I'm going to hand over to you now for the next item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is just a brief update for members of the Executive Advisory Panel. So there's a paper that will be going to Council on the 31st of March, which is in response to the first paper that you may remember that went to Council back in July 2021, when the Council agreed to declare a climate and environmental emergency. But also within that paper was a commitment to come back with, if you like, a progress update on the work that's being undertaken and progress towards becoming carbon neutral. As you know, that announcement with regards to the 2030 date was made back in February of this year, and the commitment of by executive and ultimately council also in February of £1 million over the next 3 years as well to drive forward our work in that area is helping on that particular journey. So it's really just to alert members that there will be a council paper. That council paper will describe the background to how we've got to this particular point. It will also highlight, I think quite helpfully, the work that this particular Executive Advisory Panel have been undertaking since it first came together in June of 2021, which includes, for example, regular updates on the bus strategy. And we've got Chris here again this morning to provide a further update on that. Opportunities to input into the active travel activity and specifically the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans that we've commented on and also been part of through separate workshops, particularly in Kettering. We've had a number of conversations, as we know, and reports and specialists coming into the panel, particularly around air quality. I know that was well received last month. And also quite a bit around shaping those key commitments that now rest within the corporate plan. And again, I could go on, but that just gives a flavour of some of the things that the panel have been working on, which is referenced in the paper. Likewise, the NN Climate 21 conference in November of last year. It also references the carbon literacy training, which, as we know, is now up and live with first sessions towards the end of this month. And again, is part of that commitment. It also references the climate change route map, which we brought to the panel in November of last year. And that has been updated. So where we've actioned certain things, that will also be referenced, and that will be part of an appendix that will go with the climate, the wider climate report that will be going, and also the commitment to be carbon neutral. So a section on that. So there's a reasonable amount in the paper. The key recommendation is to provide an update on the wider carbon management action plan that Councillor Lee was referring to earlier, which is a piece of work that we'll be commissioning, which Rob gave an update on, I think, at last month's EAP. So what we want to do is bring the outcomes of that particular piece of work, which will basically detail what our action plan is going to be to drive down our current carbon emissions to that 2030 carbon neutral date. That will be costed as well, and the plan is to take that to executive for formal sign off. So that will be later in 2022. So I'm saying later because until we get the work commissioned and the outcomes of that, I can't be more definitive. I would like to think it will be no later though than the summer. that we'll be taking a paper to executive on that, but hopefully sooner than that. So I just wanted to alert members of the panel that the paper was coming, so it wasn't a surprise. And what I will aim to do is try and get that to you where I can in advance of the papers being published next week. So it was really, it was a for information item, but again, I didn't want members to wanted members to be aware of that the paper was coming. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, George. That's a useful update, I think, for members, and obviously we'll get more detail out as we have it. But I think it's another positive step forward in terms of trying to march on with this and make sure we're sticking, well, getting completed our commitments that we've made, which is really positive. So unless people have burning questions on that, which I don't think we have, that's good. As I say, we'll provide more updates as we can. We'll move on to the next item, which is the bus strategy update with Chris. Yep, Chris is on here, perfect. So over to you. I can't hear Chris, but I'm hoping it's not just me.
No, Chair, it looks like it's not just you, because I can't hear him either, and I can see he's coming on and off mute, so I'm guessing he's trying his best to try and resolve the issue.
Perfect, thank you. And I know sometimes it happens where some people can't get it to work for whatever reason.
Is that working?
Yes.
Excellent. Right. Is Raj going to share these slides, or am I?
Yeah, I can share them. 1 second.
Thanks. Right, so that's just the introduction slide, who I am. So Chris Ragg, Transportation Development Manager for the Council. And the next, so what I'm going to cover is very briefly an update on the funding announcement for the Bus Service Improvement Plan, then talk through the results of the Enhanced Partnership Stakeholder Consultation following the last presentation to the panel, then talk about a number of things that have happened since then, the continuation by government of bus recovery grant, some of the implications, or one implication of setting a subsidised bus service budget as part of the overall council budget for the coming year, and then how that feeds into a network review and marketing of bus services. So next slide, please. So the reason it's a very brief announcement on the Bus Service Improvement Plan is that there has been no announcement by government of funding yet. The announcement had been expected by 28th of February, but government has been delayed in doing that. We don't have an expected date at the moment. So we don't know how much funding we're going to get through that process. So moving on to the next one, the Enhanced Partnership Stakeholder Consultation. We had 13 responses to the consultation, 1 from a member of the public, 5 from various statutory consultees, 7 from town and parish councils. In the round, 8 of those 13 consultees were supportive of the Enhanced Partnership proposals. A number that's sitting under your pictures, 1 was neutral and the other was either opposed to the EP or their response raised concerns. And the concerns were really, and I can quite understand this, but it's things that, as I said, in previous presentations, are not things that the Enhanced Partnership is going to deliver. So the principal one was the lack of plans to improve rural bus services, which is something that's achieved through the subsidy budget, or can be achieved, which is a separate process because the Enhanced Partnership is basically about commercial services. And also there was a lot of, there were also some comments about the lack of detail on how we're going to deliver some of the proposals in the plan, but particularly because so many of them are dependent on whether we get funding through the bus service improvement plan to go ahead with them. So we're not at that stage. And in pressing ahead for an early enhanced partnership, we weren't going to have that level of detail. So next slide, please. So in terms of the comments that are broadly supportive of the enhanced partnership, the first, which was from the Competition and Markets Authority, who made a standard set of comments to every plan that they were consulted on, is that the counterfactual, which is what would happen if there was no enhanced partnership, should be considered in the competition test. And that is a change that we can make, because the competition test, although it appears in the document, isn't actually part of the enhanced partnership itself. So that change can be made without triggering a further round of consultation. The lower emission buses are welcome, but a full electric trial is requested. And I don't think that was at all something we were, that was outside what we were saying in the plan. It's one of those challenges. Do we say lower emission? Do we say zero emission? Exactly what are we meaning? And a request that Kettering, Corby and Wellingborough Town Councils should have a place on the wider stakeholder group. Again, that's not the enhanced partnership scheme said there should be places for town and parish councils. It doesn't say how many or how they're made up. That's a level of detail that can be done, doesn't require any change to the plan. And the final two comments are just generally supportive comments. So next slide, please, Raj. And the sort of next set of comments that we had were around things that either the enhanced partnership or the bus service improvement plan are doing, but they're a level of detail too much really for either what the documents are saying or where we are at present. So the police on encouraging actions to reduce crime and the fear of crime, and improved bus train connections are something where the bus service improvement plan encourages. More routes should have tier 1 services. Well, obviously it's desirable for routes to have more frequent services, but that essentially means more passengers need to be travelling for that to be viable. And the importance of paper-based timetables, really. And then things that are good things that I think we'd support, but aren't things that are part of the enhanced partnership. So more focus on community transport provision. Community transport is the important role is recognised in the bus service improvement plan, but because the EAP is a partnership with commercial operators, community transport doesn't feature there. Bus driver recruitment and retention, that's a thing. That's an operational issue for the operators. One's about extending rural bus services, which as I've said, is something that's really a matter for the bus subsidy budget. And COVID recovery suggestion, better bus ventilation, again, that's an operational issue for operators. So moving on to that's where we are with that. And essentially from that, there are no, the view is that there are no objections there, no changes that we need to make that would require the second round of operator consultation, and therefore that the proposed enhanced partnership plan and scheme can go to executive to be, in terms of what's termed, the actual thing is to be made. They're things we have to make, rather like a legal order in the wording of the Act. So moving on to the bus recovery grant, sorry, previous slide still, Raj. Since the onset of the pandemic, the bus industry has received government funding to support it so that it could still run bus services when people had been told not to run buses for essential workers initially. Most of that grant has been paid to commercial operators, but a small amount is paid to local authorities for tendered services. It was called COVID Bus Service Support Grant until August of last year. It's been called Bus Recovery Grant since then. That funding was due to end on the 6th of April, and the bus industry was facing something of what was being termed a cliff edge at that point, because funding was going to really fall off, and operators were considering what services were going to have to be cut to actually remain essentially solvent. And it was announced last month that the funding will now continue for a further 6 months. Since putting this slide together, I've discovered that it's now the Local Transport Fund. So we have another name for it, but the detail of how that funding will be allocated is still awaited. However, it has been made clear that there will be no further extensions of government support in this way beyond that 6-month period running to the end of September, beginning of October. And one of the conditions of any funding will be that local authorities should work with bus operators to develop a sustainable, to co-develop, co-develop a sustainable passenger-focused bus network. And if you could just hold that thought for a moment. So next slide, please. So the Council's budget proposals for the coming year included £275,000 split between 2 lines to implement the bus service improvement plan and to support bus services. I've provided there a list of the current services which are supported by council funding without a budget, essentially, which have been supported with grant funding in the past. Some longer ago had Section 106, the 8 and 30X3, but that funding's now run out. So you have got the strange one there of the Kettering-Thrapston service with a couple of extensions to Raund, which I've said is supported to the sum of no £1,000 a year. And that's because that was a commercial service. It's one that's been on the margins for some time, but the previous operator, Diamond Coaches, basically closed down in April 2020, just as the pandemic was approaching. And nobody was going to take on a service at a time when government was telling people not to travel, when it wasn't a strong service. So we are supporting that, but it is actually not costing any money. The income we're getting from the service is covering the costs of running it, which is why it has that strange no subsidy. The Welland Wanderer is just a contribution we make to Wilberston Parish Council, who organise the consortium that funds the service primarily from the parish councils. So that's what that does leave. Those add up to 195,000 at the moment. There's also, we would expect, going to be a government grant on top of that we've received for some years of 103,000. So there is going to be some headroom within the budget for the coming year. Even if all those services continued as is, there is some headroom to think about what new can be done in giving services back to communities that don't have one. And so the council needs to decide how to spend that money. And one of the things that needs doing is that by law, the 1985 Transport Act basically says that where a council has a bus subsidy budget, it has to consult on and publish its policies of how to spend that money. So that's something that needs to be done over the coming months, to look at the different options as to how that money can be spent, with a view to introducing the new services in the autumn. So next slide, please, Raj. So building on what I've just said there about subsidised services, building on what I'd said about the government requirement that we co-design a sustainable network, commercial network with operators, and the fact that we already said in the enhanced partnership that we needed to review of the commercial network by April 2023, one of the things we can obviously do is bring those things together in certain ways and actually look at that over it's not going to be the next 6 months, because if operators are going to introduce revised services in September, October, they need to be making the decisions on what those are going to be and registering with the traffic commissioner before the summer holidays. So it is going to be, over the next 3 to 4 months that work's going to need to be done. And we need to discuss with operators exactly how that's going to work. It's not as big an issue in Northamptonshire as it could be in areas where there are multiple operators on the same corridor. That's not a significant issue in Northamptonshire. But it's still, exactly understanding their timescales, how they're going to do it, and how we work together to do that is an issue. So that is going to be one of the key things to do over the coming months. And I think then we have the final substantive slide. One of the things that has to be realised is that with no government support and with less passengers, commercial bus service levels, frequencies are going to decline unless patronage increases. So what can we actually do in the short term to actually try and boost patronage before those decisions about what sustainable levels are going to be are made? Because if, for example, we could get patronage up from 75% of pre-COVID levels to 85% of pre-COVID levels, that's going to make a substantial difference on the decisions that bus operators are going to make. The Enhanced Partnership proposed a 3-year marketing strategy, and what I'm thinking through and going to be talking through with communications colleagues is what can we do to bring that forward in the short term to increase patronage, working with operators. I know, for example, talking to them, Stagecoach have plans to do some marketing, particularly some aimed at concessionary pass holders who particularly not, they've returned to the bus less than fare paying passengers. But what can we do working with the bus operators to actually encourage more passengers and therefore reduce the negative impact that will otherwise happen on services? So, and then the final slide is, are there any questions?
Great, thank you, Chris, for going through that in such detail. I think it's really useful for members to be up to date on all of this. And it brought up some interesting questions, particularly around how you increase patronage, which is obviously important from maintaining the bus services point of view, but also from a sustainability perspective as people shift to more sustainable modes of transport. So we've got some hands going up. Councillor Dell, you were first.
Thank you very much for that. You've obviously put a lot of work into this, and it's really appreciated. Thank you. I just had one minor point, and it's kind of related to a previous topic. Is I noted in one of the slides that it said that low emission buses are welcome, but a full electric trial is requested. I'm just wondering about electric buses. I know some cities run them already. We already mentioned about how for something like electric waste collection, we'd need upgraded substations, and there's a huge capital cost. Would like an electric trial be run by the operators, or would that be something that we would also be paying for as well? And and also how much are electric buses? I know that we mentioned that the collection vehicles are like 300k at least. I presume they're cheaper because there's more of them already in service.
In terms of answering the second question first, I don't think they are, because I suspect that a diesel one is probably more expensive than a diesel refuse collection vehicle. Electric buses are significantly more expensive to buy than a diesel one, and they also cost more to run. And one of the things, the whole life cost is seen as more to run. Because one of the things that isn't as yet unknown is when you actually have to replace the batteries. How long will the batteries actually last in service? It's one of the things that the bus industry is tackling. It's also one of those things. There are equally things. There is one manufacturer who's saying one of the problems with electric buses at the moment is that they're actually rebuilt diesel buses. So they've got a frame designed to support a heavy engine at the back, which is heavier than it needs to be. And therefore, if you make it lighter, it won't. So there's a lot going on with that. with electric buses at the moment. In terms of it is, there are a lot more going in service, and as more going service, the experience with them will improve. The likelihood is that an operator, operators would still operate them from their premises. And it is one of the issues that's been picked up where electric bus trials have been done, is that the conditions of the electric supply network in the vicinity, in terms of how much surplus capacity is there to actually power the buses, is a key issue in the business case of whether electric buses in an area will work. So if you take Kettering, Stagecoach's depot in Kettering, a large bus depot, if you were going to have well, there's two things actually. A, if you're going to have a large fleet of vehicles in there, actually, is there enough capacity in the electric network to cope with them charging? But also, actually, on what is actually quite a tight site there, if you ever look at the way the buses are packed into that depot, very visible, obviously, with the main road passing straight in front of it. One of the issues is how you actually physically get the buses charged, because it can take more space to have them sitting there at a charging point, effectively all night or however long, rather than basically coming into the depot, going up to the pump, being filled with diesel, and then going and stabling wherever. So there are some key operational issues, and I know that's one operators are considering. It's obviously going to be that potentially is less of an issue if you had a small operator who was, say, going to have 2 electric buses on a route. The scale of the issues is going to be different. But one of the other challenges is, because the bus industry isn't really generating profits at the moment, the only vehicles that are being bought by any major operators at the moment are effectively electric buses that have been funded by government grants. Because, in fact, indeed, some of the early stages of government support actually prohibited operators from making dividends on it. Government would not, understandably, fund profit. So therefore, the operators weren't making money that they could actually reinvest into the fleet. So it is a challenging time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Councillor Lorman, did you want to come in? Because I know this is something you've been looking at.
Yeah, to say that, yes, as Chris said, it is an operator decision what vehicles they have. Most of the electric vehicles are more suited to urban routes than the interurban routes in the sort of semi-rural routes we have, partly because of distance from the base to recharge, etc. But just on the cost of them, I remember when the gold X4s that we see around from Stagecoach, they're 10 years old now, and they were £180,000 then 10 years ago each, because I went to the opening one. So, and so what I think you'll find that the cost for the larger, those sort of buses is about the same as it would be for the freighters we were talking about on top. I think there's more opportunity with the single decker, the smaller urban buses, and that we don't have as many of, but the sort of W1 route down the towns. But so yes, we're certainly looking at it, but it is an operator decision.
Thank you, Councillor Lorman. Councillor Allibone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I suppose from a point of view of increasing bus use in the short and possibly medium term, of course, ever increasing fuel costs are going to mean that people, particularly in rural areas, if they need to access their local towns, are going to think more seriously, possibly, about using buses, and they're going to be a little bit more canny as to how they use their cars. Moving on to the bus, how you power the buses. I mean, hydrogen is obviously one that's being used for HGVs, but there's a lot of work going on with methane powered vehicles. From an agricultural perspective, New Holland have got a methane powered tractor, similar horsepower to it's a 250 horsepower tractor, same power output, same working time as a diesel equivalent, about 7 or 8 hours. Unfortunately, as opposed to 150,000 for a diesel version, the methane version is about 300,000. So that's a big no, really. But and of course, they're suited more to dairy farmers, stock farmers that have got anaerobic digesters. But the conversion from a diesel engine to methane is quite straightforward, I gather. It's as opposed to a common rail diesel, it's the injection system which needs looking at, and you need to introduce an ignition system because, of course, it needs a spark to actually fire it. But I suspect that we're going to be looking, whether it's HEVs, whether it's refuse lorries, whether it's buses, we're going to be having to look at a more sustainable, unless battery power increases, battery technology increases amazingly quickly. I think the longer term route for heavier vehicles is going to be hydrogen or methane. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allibone, and certainly an interesting insight into what's going on in the agriculture sector. And obviously, I'm sure all industries will be looking at what each other are doing as we move forward with this, but it certainly throws up some complex things to think about. Haven't got any other hands up at this moment, unless anybody else wants to say anything. But thank you, Chris, for your input. As members have said, that was really useful, and the detail certainly useful in terms of thinking about this moving forward.
And so, again, Chair, sorry to interrupt, Chair. Just to highlight to members that there will be a paper on this going to executive on the 14th of April as well. So just so that members are aware. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So we will leave that item there, which brings us on to the close of the meeting. As ever, thank you, everybody. It's been another useful discussion. And good to get the updates we have done, and look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting, and thank you for your participation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.